Well, there's such a fascination out there among a number of people with Gammell, and I don't blame you in a way. I mean, there's some there's a cult element to this whole thing. Unfortunately, I say the whole thing. I mean, like for me, coming out of the background I had, which was sometime at the studio school in New York and the Art Students League, there was something about finding Gammell that was rather an astonishing event. And the more I knew him, the more uh, the more I'd have to say I thought it was an astonishing event. You know, the more I believed that he had done something that our culture, sorely needed. Somebody he had actually stood in the gap, is the expression. And even though his motive was to the gap he saw was one where he wanted a form of painting, and it would have been the academic. He wanted that form to be continued past this chaos, in which he included the impressionist, but the modernist thing, all this experimenting and wild stuff that seemed to actually, and certainly in his view, exit the very definition held, for our form over centuries. Yeah, but above all, I've used the expression before, the establishment domination of the art schools has in fact cut out the legs out from under us, and Gammell did provide the basis, thankfully through people like Richard Lack and others teaching, Bob Hunter, Tom Dunley now, just many of us have done things to try to make sure that we are also part of that. But so you can't take Gammell too seriously. I mean, what he's done for us is huge, and I'm talking about particularly now the writing. What he provided for us in the writing, reminding us of the sound base from which we sprang, and from which this very form, in which this very form finds its definition. So, and yet, so all those things are true. In my work, I've obviously not become a Gammell type painter, even though I learned what he had, and could paint those kinds of imaginative painting that way if I chose to. I rather find myself going with what he said to do, and that is to do what he says, not what he does. And so, for me, I'm actually quite a bit closer to the Boston School's approach to painting. But that's just, it is what it is and all that. But nevertheless, the question that comes in is, this time it's from oh no. Okay, I should remember that. I think it's Jason. Jason, he says, can you comment on the personality and teaching style of Mr. Gammell? I've heard that he could be a difficult teacher at times, and that he was a bit of a curmudgeon. Any funny or interesting stories about Gammell and how he would teach or critique his students? I've already done that, by the way. So if you can go back in those videos, I'm going to try to go back myself now that I see this question and put that up on the board, the number that you want to go to. But I have actually taken the time to describe how Gammell taught. And I don't really want to do that at great length here. I mean, it's what you would, if any number of you people who have worked in the Lack studios or in mine or other ones know what that would have encompassed. So, and I'm talking about everything from cast drawing to still life painting as the basis, and figure drawing and figure and portrait painting. Just that simple model in which he would also simultaneously encourage you to read like crazy, he wanted you to become a well-rounded mind, as well as a good painter, a good craftsman. And his emphasis on craftsmanship was strong. But as I said, he would do things like sending people to the opera. We all went to see plays when we were in Williamstown. Gammell had season tickets for us, and other kinds of events. He certainly would send us out of town on his dollar to go to the theater in New York, or go to the Met for a special show, whatever. So but that's, that was Gammell doing what he considered his job, to give you a well-rounded education that would benefit you in one way and another in the arts. And particularly, I would say, though he was aiming at the pictorial form that was organized around, as I said, like storytelling. When they used to believe that history painting was the highest form, Gammell wanted you to actually have something of value to say. And there's no question about that's what he had in his mind. So he really was combining that with, despite saying the subject is nothing, but he wanted you to have more of a mind than that. And you can see the kind of mind he had. And one of the funny stories that Gammell brought to us, I mentioned, was that he was a big fan of Carl Jung, and he in one of the clubs in which he was a member in Boston. These are elite clubs, the wealthy Boston, the old aristocratic, if you want to call it that, class. They would hang out together, the Tavern Club, places like that, the Union Club. I forget which one this happened in, but he said that at one point he was holding forth about Jung, and he was, I don't know if it's corrected or silenced by a psychologist, perhaps the rank of Will James, who said to him, "You know nothing about what you're talking about. You don't know nothing about this field. You know nothing. You don't know anything about what you're saying. You don't know what you're talking about." And Gammell would tell the story on himself, but nevertheless, obviously you're not limited in your way of thinking about these things. Gammell's idea was, in his Hound of Heaven series, was to take a Jungian approach to the Hound of Heaven, which interpreted Francis Thompson's poem as an expression of, instead of a born-again experience, to be a nervous breakdown. And, I'm probably simplifying it too much when I say it that way, but nevertheless, that, and so his digging around and researching it, all it did is it provided imagery for him. And Gammell was trying to correlate it with his own personal, some experiences he had had in that direction. So, I don't know if you want to say it's maybe some form of catharsis. Maybe he was doing the research anyway, and he saw images because of it. And his images are fascinating. There's no question about that. These multiple images, a drowning person with hanging on to somebody who's heading toward the top of the water, hanging onto their feet. Those kinds of images are really quite psychologically compelling. The easy one of the guy standing, a young man standing on a stone floor, and all the pillars and everything going sideways on him. These are very interesting psychological elements, but. I better make some shorter stories so you can actually get some fun out of this. Teaching style. So Gammell's teaching style was what you'd get from any of us. Any critique, Gammell would come in. First of all, he would find out what you were up to in the course of a day, and then he would come by at your request and critique as needed. And his critiques were always first in the category of how to improve your eye and to show you, if with a brush in hand, if necessary, as necessary, to show you what was in error and to then give you guidelines, standard coaching. And he was very good at it. What he also was good at, though, was aphorisms, and he just throw them at you like crazy. And I think I may have mentioned that one of my favorites at one point was, and I would these just, I don't know what you want to think of these, but these would be like blows out of you'd be thinking he was just saying something polite, and all of a sudden you realize he just smacked you in the head, with one of these things. I mean, one of the favorite ones that I have is, "To err is human, to err twice is stupid." And he will look you right in the eye when he's saying that to you, and you have to sit there and figure out what in the heck you did twice stupidly. I could certainly think of quite a number of things that, but his idea was to get you to be thinking and making sure you followed through, especially when he gave you a critique about something. He did want you to follow through. And I found the hugest benefit by actually, when he said do something, I actually followed through and looked into it, did what he said to see why he would have said that. I looked hard at it. And you began to get, by doing that, I began to get my head around the way he thought, and that was the more important part of it, to get the mind of Gammell, which of course was a borrowed mind. It was the mind from his predecessors, and very fascinating the way this game actually works. But getting that mind in here is a big deal. Anyway, so I don't want to make this really long. I'm already at 10 minutes. Look at that. So what are the things? Curmudgeon. I never thought of Gammell as a curmudgeon troll. I mean, he sort of had a bearing that was curmudgeonly. But when he spoke, he was always to the point. He was rarely personal in any bad way. I mean, when he was, it was the end of my time with him. But no, curmudgeon, interesting. But one of the things he did, I just got to throw this at the very beginning of my time trying to study with him, and I had a difficult time getting in, I'd have to say. And he, in fact, said I beat the doors down. Well, first of all, I wasn't 18, and so that was a big deal. How do you work with Gammell if you're not 18? Or somewhere in that neighborhood at the very least. And so here I was. At one occasion, I was bringing my work into him, and another guy had come with me to have Gammell look at his work as well. And the other person actually had come from a background rather like Gammell's, and so Gammell and I know I'd written letters to Gammell and that sort of thing, none of which I'd done. I just simply made my connections vicariously through other guys, other members. Well, it was clear that Gammell rather favored my friend, and we're standing there, and he walked, so he strode confidently, Gammell did, up to one of my paintings, and he turned to the other gentleman and he said, "Did you do this?" And so there are moments like that tickled and astonished me. Do you know what I mean? I later found that Gammell had said, and I don't know if he said it to me, he might have, he said, "I can usually tell before a person gets across the room whether he's going to study with me." Well, you could say, what did that mean? I mean, he'd done his research and you weren't 18. Now, it could have meant 1,000 things, but it was one of those things where you began to wonder what was on his mind. He also said that he would try to analyze people in terms of their psychological types. This is, again, the Jungian thought. And that if he did, and if he guessed right, he would actually be able to teach you better. And there are a couple different people in which he admitted that he had totally guessed wrong about what their type was. So how it affected his time with him, who knows? Those are some of the more curious things that were typical, that were characteristic, or that happened, let's put it that way. You figure out what the characteristic is. One of the curious things that we saw, there were a couple different things. One of the ones I found the most intriguing was his reaction to personal, I don't know if it's personal embarrassment or what, but a couple different times. I mean, like literally at least twice. Maybe more though. There would have been an experience. Sorry. At one point, Gammell had gone out to critique somebody's painting. This is my memory of it. So if any of my fellow students who are there want to correct me, I'll stand corrected. But at one point, he'd gone out, and all of us were there. If I'm not mistaken, we'd gone out with him in the car in Williamstown to a landscape spot. And his critique was immediately, well, you've taken in too much stuff. You hadn't limited your scope of your landscape enough. And he said, you've taken in too much. And he said, and he took the guy's brush and he began to then forthwith add even more stuff from the left side and from the right side and make the scope of the painting go even wider. And you could see him getting more and more flustered every second as he watched himself do this. But what was interesting, and by the way, the guy was 80-something, right? And you don't expect that could happen to any of us. I might have done it at way less than 80, but this form of dyslexic, thing was going on there. And so, at whatever point, we got ourselves back into the car and started heading back, and immediately Gammell started on Dennis Miller Bunker, and it's one of those things that if it hadn't happened at least twice, and I think it happened 3 times, you might have thought nothing of it, but his story about Bunker, the entire monologue about Bunker was about Bunker's suicide and how Bunker committed suicide, and I mean, like, astonishing stuff. He went on and on about it, and so at some point, one of us in one of these rides said to him, well, but you wrote in the book, they died of influenza. And he said, well, you couldn't say that it was suicide in the circles in which he lived and that sort of thing without hurting people, something to that effect, which shows you 2 very interesting things. One is that he might not have told the truth in a biography. And number 2 is that he cared about others enough to not care about that, right? So that's two very interesting pieces of information. he was a bird watcher. I mean, how many times you'd find him in the middle of your. He'd always come out landscape painting with his binoculars around his neck, and so he'd always, in the midst of something, a critique or anything, he all of a sudden would go, his head would fly up, and or he would grab his binoculars and actually say, "Excuse me," or whatever, and look for whatever bird it was. At one point, one of us had seen a kingfisher down on the bridge up to his house on Hopper Road, and told him about it. And he said, "I have been bird watching for how many years? 70 years or something." He said, "And I have never yet seen a kingfisher, even though they're relatively common in New England." And I should say not uncommon, probably a better way to say it. But he immediately asked to be driven out. And of course, I shouldn't say of course, but the kingfisher was gone. The kingfisher had actually been sitting right on the bridge itself, and then it moved over to a rock further over, or to a post further over. So we thought, as looking back, we thought it might have stayed there. But anyway, but he was intent on getting all the bird counts in and that sort of thing. But yeah, in the curmudgeon-y part, Gammell I think he had a terrific sense of humor, but some of it was exposed when my wife one year. She decided that one year she had figured out this way to make really cool slippers out of sort of a crochet technique, and so they'd be made out of tubes, and the tubes would go around, all the tubes together like my fingers would go around. They make this nice fluffy little slipper, and so she made a pair for Mr. Gammell, and he just loved them, and talked about them all the time. And so she decided the next year to make one, but this time she made them and put in bells in the toes. And it tickled him so much. He called her in, and he wanted to have a meeting with her. And, everybody would always, if you get called into Gammell, sure it was your last day in this place. But it was the funniest thing. He got the biggest charge out of it, and they laughed together for some while and kidded around about it forever from that point forward. I think Eleanor had a plan before we left of doing something even more exotic the next time out, but because he took it so well. But yeah, I could probably tell you more this way. You don't need to waste time. 17 minutes already. Look, I hope you enjoyed that. There's going to be a video. There's going to be a bunch of guys together, former Gammell students, at the Guild not too far hence, and we're going to be having a roundtable. Former members of Gammell's or people who study with Gammell, and we're going to have a roundtable discussing certain aspects of Gammell, and it should be a lot of fun. I'm hoping that somebody who records it in some way and gets everything out for you guys to enjoy. Anyway, see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, share, and all the rest. And keep on loving Gammell.